They're ready to run, and they're off.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tongue Tie Off podcast on the Pace Setters Network. Cody Rennell and J Bond bringing you all the jazz, J Bond, from the world of harness racing.
Jazz hands. Yes, we are, and it's going to be an interesting discussion. So the podcast, which we're going to be dealing with for the next, however long it takes, is going to be a little bit wieldy and windy, but I wrote an article, obviously. I've started to get back in the habit of writing articles and enjoying it. I'm loving the fact that I'm not writing these articles about, I guess, little fundamental ideas that we're given the opportunity with this platform, Codes, to throw in the avant-garde ones. We'll get to it in a moment, but what I discussed in this most recent article, I don't personally believe is such an avant-garde off-Broadway idea.
No.
More that you're aware, sadly, how unlikely it probably is to happen. But even I've thought about this for years, and I've spoken about it on radio and TV previously, maybe not so much on TV, but definitely on SEN track. Every time I discuss this concept, which we'll discuss more in a moment, it makes more and more sense to me. And even as I was writing the article, I just thought, at least to me, it makes a hell of a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us about what was the idea, Jace? Because I mean, I can explain the article, but I don't need to. You're here, you wrote it. Talk us through it.
Well, basically, where do I start? I mean, I'll go chronologically with the article. Basically, that we know the racing codes have been set up. I keep using this term overlords, but everyone knows what I'm talking about. Set up to fight each other. And it does remind me of Succession or...
you did reference Succession, yep.
The Murdoch situation with the kids, and I just watched the Australian stories on Lachlan, who's apparently seemingly won the war.
Very good series, on the Australian story.
It was excellent. But you wonder who wins out of all this competition. I know who wins. The overlords win because it's very easy. You pit everyone against one another and try and get the best out of them that way. It's the way a free market economy works, isn't it? So you get businesses to fight against one another. But in this case, fighting against one another, that is the three codes, and we'll talk about thoroughbreds a little bit off to one side, but the three racing codes are fighting against each other. States are fighting against each other. In thoroughbred, states are fighting against one another and always have in harness racing. There's this acrimony that seems built into the DNA of the situation that doesn't make any logical sense. And I've always been surprised that leaders haven't taken a step back and gone, am I really benefiting from this? Because it was all about, and the Australian model, as you well know, Codes, is all about market share.
Yes.
But I spoke about the fact that the pie's shrinking, so I'm thinking getting one from Pizza Hut or I don't really like Domino's, but it's not how much pizza you get if the pizza keeps on shrinking and you've got this little tiny McCain's thing that you're buying frozen from Woolworths. So the pie's shrinking and we're all fighting for position. But the reason that I mentioned the thoroughbreds, that is a notion that is beyond us because they cut the ties a fair while ago with the overlords. But I am certain that if greyhound racing and harness racing joined resources and forces and said, I'll tell you what, we're going to make life hard for the overlords in a number of ways, and we're going to make life easier for ourselves in a number of ways, I can't see that it wouldn't be successful. But the same can be said, I think Adam Logan's one on Twitter who's spoken about, and Channel 31 was what got me into the game, switched me over from thoroughbred racing to harness racing, and very, very quickly, mind you. And of course, back in those days, they had at least two different tracks, maybe three. Sometimes they used to have Globe Derby.
Yeah, Globe Derby.
Albion Park and also Moonee Valley back in the day.
Yep.
And, I mean, that would be wonderful as well. But, like, the shared resources, the little NATO alliance, the ANZUS alliance that could happen between greyhound racing and harness racing, who are very similar in so many ways, even down to the point where a lot of people that I speak to that bet on greyhound racing also don't mind a flutter on harness racing. Those who bet on harness racing have a flutter on greyhound racing, whereas thoroughbred punters are a little bit off to one side, I reckon. That's been my experience anyway.
And I think you'll find most people who bet on the dogs or the trots have had a punt on the gallops. not everyone who's had a punt on the gallops has had a punt on the trots or the dogs.
If you go to a big meeting in Melton, a Victoria Cup like this Saturday night, there will be greyhound people. There'll be a stack of greyhound people on track. And if you go to a Melbourne Cup or a Phoenix, you'll see a stack of harness racing people on track.
Yeah.
There is a natural, organic alliance there already, Coates.
And I think, there's two ways. So I hear what you're saying, and there's multiple ways you could look at this, right? Now, it's a bit, is a merging of the two going to happen anytime soon? No, it seems very unlikely. It wouldn't happen. But actually combining
absolutely could, but won't. Yeah.
Well, but it just But I mean, even putting aside whether it needs to or not for 1 second, because you can achieve the same as what you're largely saying as long as you work on projects together and actually collaborate together more and more. And then you end up with a natural merging of the two, which one day makes it really easy to just click your fingers and the two are joined. And I'm talking about combined media rights, for example, or joining together on promotions with the WSPs, Jabon, and all this sort of jazz. That's not hard to do. It hasn't been done too much previously, but I think it absolutely would be very easy to do today.
I should clarify here. I do not mean a merging of the two codes in their entirety. I'm talking about exactly what you're talking about. I'm talking about projects like vision provision, like going together and supporting one another when you do have a problem with the overlords. And we know that greyhound racing some time ago cut the cord, and a different wagering service provider began to sponsor the Victorian tracks, and that happens for another wagering service provider, Sportsbet and Ladbrokes, around Australia in different venues. It's the Sportsbet Victoria Cup. It just means you can go in there and say, you can't punish us, you can't attack us, because we're in this together. Cross promotion, certain meetings where there's dual code facilities, and I'm saying this wouldn't happen all of the time, but it could happen enough to make it worthwhile. Yes, media, promotion in every way, but just basically creating a stronger force. The reason that you do have, in world politics, why you do have alliances, I mean, I know NATO is much bigger, but you think of NATO, that's them saying, we want to create a bloc that is big enough to deal with what was the Soviet Union and is now Russia, right? So even if you look at it as a competition between greyhound racing and harness racing versus thoroughbreds, that gives you more bargaining power and it makes you stronger. Then the next step, we say it's unlikely to get to step one, but the next step would then be to look at racing and say, I'll tell you what, the wagering dollar is getting thinner and thinner and thinner. Sport betting is on the nose, but it has still encroached unbelievably significantly over the last decade in particular. So this whole thing, this ingrained thing in the DNA of racing that we must fight one another, you've just got to look at it and go, well, who's it benefiting? And if it's not really benefiting us, how can we maybe flip the script? And I've already mentioned, and a couple of other people have, at least one, that it might be a lopsided arrangement in one way because the greyhounds have gone sort of northward and we've gone the other way. But it wouldn't be about that. Harness racing, and we'll get to TrotsVision soon, but harness racing has had to encounter and deal with issues over the last 20 or 30 years that the greyhounds haven't. The greyhounds are a little bit, dare I say, like a rapidly emerging economy that have exploded and are now dealing with issues like vision provision, like sponsorship, like animal welfare. They've always dealt with animal welfare, but I feel if they'd had that on their agenda a little bit earlier, then the explosions that have happened in recent times might not have been so significant. So we can definitely help one another. It's not as though harness racing just goes in there and hands over, goes cap in hand and says, "Oh, please help us." Well, I believe there's no doubt we can help one another.
Of course we can. Both have a significant following, Jabon. I mean, market share aside, it's a wank of a science, the market share thing. But that aside, you have a huge following in harness racing, just like you have a huge following in dogs. It's a bit niche, I guess, from a mainstream point of view compared to an Aussie rules football, AFL or basketball, that sort of jazz. But it's clearly significant. I mean, we are talking big turnover dollars. These sports still command big turnover dollars. It's not as much as it used to be, but it's significant. It sustains entire industries. It's still significant, and I couldn't agree more with where you're going with this. I think collaboration broadly is almost always a good thing, especially when two very similar markets, two very similar offerings are actually working in unison together for the benefit of both. I couldn't agree more. I don't understand where the negatives would be. Somehow this discussion, Jabon, sort of pivoted and became all about TrotsVision, which interested me, obviously.
Well, I to be honest, that happened relatively organically. I did sort of speak about it briefly, but it's always been in my mind, to be honest. It's one of the key reasons why I've been interested in the possibility of an alliance like this, because, and I'll get you to speak to it, just take the floor at a moment, because you've been, we could call you the architect, but you have been there from word go with TrotsVision. Yep. You know exactly why it was started, the initiatives, what the strategies were, where they developed,
what the strategies were. 100%.
Yeah,
I presented those right back at the start. And
you would have
always been the vision that exactly, and it's
you're a humble man, but it is.
Well, it is
you have set the strategic vision, and you've been involved in those critical meetings to try and actually get it working. Because really, I think Australia-wide, right now, Victoria and harness racing is on the nose badly, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't that long ago that Victoria was at the forefront of just about everything. And I don't think anybody believed, really, you could do something like TrotsVision. So we could all look at it now and say this, that, and the other, and we'll talk about dispelling myths and the cost of it and all the rest. But to build that infrastructure was one of the very rare, incredibly insightful things with genuine foresight that harness racing has done. But it hasn't flowered or blossomed or bloomed probably the way we would have liked it to. But part of that is also that it would have been so much better if some other alliances, whether it was with other states in harness racing or greyhound racing or whatever it might be, had got going. But before we get the last point I want to make briefly about, so I think somebody said, or a couple of people said on Twitter that, it's still all about Sky and we need the next to go and it's the on-tilt punter and we have to follow on the back of the thoroughbreds. But the truth is, most of the really good harness racing and greyhound racing, the only thoroughbreds that are on it are international thoroughbreds. The thoroughbreds are basically, it's a day-nighter. They're the day game and we're the night game. So why we couldn't take over nights, But
it's a defeatist. I've always said this, Jabon. You'd be defeatist if you didn't think that we could command our own following on Saturday nights. I mean, it used to happen. It can happen again. There's no reason. I'll give you a little hot tip. The sport hasn't changed since we were dominating the Saturday nights, and you can, that's possibly a knock on the sport. Maybe there's only so much innovation you can do. I mean, you and I love the game, but the fact is, harness racing hasn't changed that much since we dominated that night space on Channel 31. Would you agree?
No, 100%.
It worked then.
This is why I always say there's nothing wrong with the sport. I mean, people start to say, what's wrong with the sport? There's nothing really wrong with the sport. We've spoken about standing starts and going back to,
Saturday doesn't exist anymore.
And I'm bloody pleased it does it, to be honest. But
that's because, again, there's so much more to do on Saturday nights. People aren't sitting at home en masse turning on Channel 9 to watch Hey Hey. They're not sitting at home turning on Channel 31. And unfortunately, they're not going to Melton to attend the trots. Do you know what I mean? But they might have done it at the showgrounds back in the day.
I'm telling you what you might do, though, and this is the dream, what I've outlined, is turning on Dog Vision, and getting... You don't have to do the full runner by runner. I've personally never been a fan of all that, but particularly if you had a couple of hosts, and it's not about me, but having a greyhound host who knows a little bit about harness racing and a harness racing host who knows something about greyhound racing, and being able to create that that excitement. Channel 31, the reason you loved it is because you got to you weren't at the track, but you got to feel that you were there. TrotsVision does that, but the wait between races and all the rest is difficult, and I think the way it's gone is a little bit tricky. But going back to the original point, talk to us about let's dispel some myths and rewrite some history.
There's lots of myths, Jabon. You tell me the myth and I'll dispel it. You throw one at me and I'll talk about it. I'll either confirm it or I'll.
It costs the GDP of a small Caribbean nation to run TrotsVision. Discuss.
Absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And I saw a figure today thrown round that it cost it's cost the industry 15 million since its inception. I mean, honestly, Jace, where people are plucking these figures from, right? I'd say God knows, but I actually have a pretty sneaky suspicion, and most of us probably do, because those of us in this game would know who the players are and whatnot. So, but I'll say this, right? Those people who are peddling disinformation and misinformation, and that is deliberately
fake news,
putting out rubbish, right? Deliberately inserting absolute crap, right, into the grapevine, right, so that it spreads. And I don't know what they're hoping to achieve out of it. I don't know, but it is absolutely damaging the industry's morale. All right, and it is painting a picture that is just completely and utterly incorrect. All right, 15 mil. If you added up the entire broadcast budget of HRV via the annual report, which is listed there every year, right, going back to about 2020, right, you'd possibly come up with the figure overall in total, right, that apparently TrotsVision has cost the industry since it was brought in 2018.
Yeah.
All right. It is rubbish. All right. That figure that is listed in the annual report has climbed by $2 million since 2017 to today. That's what it's climbed overall. Now, that budget line, Jabon, would it be inclusive of everything from radio broadcast, to the cost of getting the vision and audio feed from the track up to Sky Racing. Now, we've always paid that. The industry's always paid that in Victoria. I don't know if they have to pay it in other states. Now, that's another little interesting thing. It costs a fair bit of money, but if you do the right deal with Tab, remember,
surely they do.
No, hang on. Remember, we did a deal with Tab many, many moons ago, okay? We've been wedded to that deal for a long time. If you've done a deal more recently, let's say our friends in, I don't know, just plucking one out, New South Wales had done a deal more recently. Perhaps they've got a deal where that stuff's actually being looked after. That's quite a saving, by the way, getting that money up. Anyone who's in the back end of broadcast will know how much money that costs, all right?
Of course.
That comes out of the broadcast line, okay? The camera operations, the audio, the mic, the entire project of it's not 365 days. We don't race Christmas, but every single race meeting a year out of Victoria, there's an OB truck, right? There's cameras, there's microphones, there's technical costs, there's internet, all of it, right? That's all part of this broadcast budget. Within that whole broadcast budget too, Jabon, is whatever we spend on TrotsVision, okay? And I guarantee you it is a very, very small percentage of that overall number. So when you consider the hard numbers, which, as I keep saying, are listed in the annual report, right, and have been all the way through, and then you look at this nonsense that's going on around how much TrotsVision's costing, it is absolute rubbish. And I'd like to say that it was just people have made honest mistakes. Well, I don't believe that to be the case. And the sad thing about misinformation, as you'd well know, Jabon, is you end up getting people who take it as fact. They then mention it to someone else in the industry. They mention it to the participant. That participant takes it to the races. Everyone gets told.
Becomes real.
And it becomes real. And then people are going on Twitter and saying things like, oh, it's a money pit. Unfortunately, it has to be deemed as a complete and utter failure because of what it's cost. Well, guess what? If you're basing it on that because of what you believe it costs because of absolute nonsense, then you're wrong. And I don't blame the people, Jace, who have just heard the whispers and taken it as fact. I don't blame them, although, it's not their fault. I'm blaming the people who are peddling the misinformation deliberately.
Let's be really clear, though. This is how pervasive it is, okay? So the bloke actually on Twitter, who's a great friend of the show and a great friend of harness racing, a wonderful individual, Simon Sharp, who called it a money pit.
Good fella.
But not only is he good fella, not only is he Ray Liotta, Henry Hill, Joe Pesci, How Music, and he's actually a smart, intelligent human being. So it's not that hard to infect that populace either. And I'll tell you why it's very easy, I reckon, to spread this. Because an operation like racing.com does expend an enormous amount of money. And so people naturally go, oh, well, it's not hard for me to, you understand, to take that leap to go, oh, well, we are spending something similar to racing.com, who have their own broadcast team, who go everywhere, who pay enormous amounts more to talent, who have shitloads more camera, you know, all the rest of it. TrotsVision really, for most of the time, has been a very bare bones operation.
It has, yes.
But when we get the extra camera, I won't say how much it costs, but it is not a lot of money to get that extra camera for the parade ring interviews and all the rest of it. Now, at the end of this, I'll get to some of the reasons why I don't believe it has blossomed and bloomed potentially the way it should have. But I think there's a couple of other myths to dispel here as well around, well, we've spoken about the cost of TrotsVision, but also why it was originated. And I think it's worth noting that even if you outlined the 9 reasons it might, you know, that it might have been inaugurated, the most critical one, I would have thought, but you can speak to it because you know more about it than me, is future-proofing. Is to say, we're going to set something up so that we can pull the trigger and we have something ready to roll. Yeah. If for whatever reason we need to really own our own destiny and provide our own vision, and that's there now.
100%. So it was, and it's also, you know, the changing way people watch coverage, Jace, is on mobile and tablet. Okay, it's changing, and we know it is. But Sky Racing is still massively important on the television. But I guess a lot of people are still watching Sky obviously through betting apps or through on their phone, whatever. Yeah. And there is still a portion that was sitting at home watching on TV or going to the pub and watching it there. But you're spot on, carving out the digital rights, right? And remember, prior to 2018, when TrotsVision was launched, right, there was no opportunity for harness racing to tell its story, right, from a punting, from a editorial, from a storytelling perspective at all, other than on those big nights on Sky. And even then you were limited to, you know, the interview, J-Bomb, which you and Blake Redden and Adam Hamilton and Mick Guerin and others have done over the years in the stalls or on track, right? We were limited to those moments.
What was that silly little thing that Sky came up with themselves for a while?
Which one's that?
Where you could just pick to watch.
Oh no! So yeah, Sky Racing Active.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was
But the other thing that I don't think people understand is you know when we've had a deal with, number one, how much it costs to be on racing.com and all the rest of it, because that is not cheap and there's a huge production cost there and you have to pay the money.
Yes.
But if you wanted to carve out a night like they did with the Inter-Dominion, and I've done a couple of times with Sky 2 or Sky Thoroughbred Central, you're paying every single time. So you are not controlling your own destiny in that way, are you?
No, 100%. Exactly. You're spending a fortune to do that, for starters. Yeah. Yes, you're right. And we were doing that previously with the big feature meetings. So come 2018, it was okay. This was the vision. How do we build a digital platform? Firstly, get our rights, right, so that we can digitally stream the rights. And we got that, and it was that was a big win, and that was under David Martin's time. So we got those rights. We negotiated for them, right? We had the trots.com.au built, which had been agreed back in 2015 that we needed a new website to properly tell the harness racing story, because to say it in a as kind a way as I can, harness.org.au simply wasn't going to cut the mustard when it came to quality content, J-Bon, including things like videos, Facebook Live from the track, which then sort of morphed into what we turned into TrotsVision. Yeah. Okay. So we built the website, got that launched, and then we got the rights for TrotsVision through our website, and then bang, on it goes. Now, the idea of TrotsVision was to largely utilize the infrastructure which already existed at our racetracks. Okay. Yeah. Now, what have we got at the racetracks, Bon? We've got the camera equipment. We've got the OB team already there, the broadcast back-end audio and vision team, right? Yep. Supplying that content up to Sky. Yeah. Okay. Well, we built TrotsVision. Let's not forget this too. We built TrotsVision with Sky. It was the Sky's technical team that built the back end for us, because we always saw this as being a joint effort, right, to simply increase the distribution of our enhanced storytelling from the racetrack.
Yes.
Okay. So all of a sudden now we've got a situation where you simply turn it on. Okay. And it was right at the start, it was really, as you'll recall, pretty old-fashioned. Well, it was cutting edge for the time, but it was pretty clumsy. 5 minutes before each race, it would cut in.
Yeah.
3 minutes after each race, it would cut out because we didn't have any content to fill. It was just streaming. That was step one, right? So we get that launched, right? But now what do we have at the racetrack in addition to the OB team, Jace? Every single race meeting, what do they have up in the tower?
A race caller.
A race caller, a voice, right? Now that voice is coming through the OB.
It should be
truck.
used much more, and I'll get to
My
that.
oath, my oath, because they call a race every 35 minutes, all right? And for the rest of the time, they don't have much to do. They can learn the colours, etc., but they're pretty bored up there, and they were happy to be involved in TrotsVision. So all of a sudden, if you can get them some pictures of the parade ring, which happened in time, brilliant. But if they just see the horses warming up and they just bring the microphone in, then 8 to 10 minutes before each race, J-Bon, you've got additional content. The cameras cost you no more because they're already fixed on the racetrack. The camera people are just operating the cameras, and they're filling in time because otherwise they're sitting around doing nothing in between. So the whole thing was to utilize much of the infrastructure that we already had on course, right?
Mm-hmm.
And simply provide an enhanced product on the Metro meetings, Saturday nights, and on the Country Cup meetings. Now, what you could do at the country venues, J-Bon, you'll recall, and the Metro, we had Robbie Orber on the MC, Mike, at all Melton meetings, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. Well, the camera's already on him. Bang, we're now broadcasting him. Now he's being broadcast through TrotsVision. And guess how much that costs us extra, J-Bon? Zilch.
Just,
right?
yeah, I was going to say
Not giving
$1
away any
less than a
secrets.
buck.
Exactly. Okay, so that's how it was. So we went down that path. Kirsten Graham, she's brilliant, right? Absolutely brilliant. And she was already
100.
hosting. She was already hosting races up at Bendigo forever, and and no one was filming it. She was only doing it to the small crowd that would turn up. So what do? We turn the camera on, and there she is on the track, right in the cold, but on a microphone, and all of a sudden we've got a host up there at Bendigo. Didn't cost us an extra cent, right? So this was the very early part of significantly enhancing storytelling, talking to the drivers, showing the drivers' faces, all that jazz, and it wasn't costing more money. Okay.
No.
Of course. Now, fast forwarding it, I won't tell the whole story, but fast forward it, there was enhancements made during COVID, of course, and all of them were made. Yes, they cost more money to bring in the digital LED backdrop at Melton to enhance the studio. That costs money to purchase. It comes at a cost. I won't say how much, but it's really not that much in the grand scheme of things, and a drop in the ocean of the overall broadcast budget. I'll give you that tip. A couple of additional cameras for the studio as we pivoted people in there during COVID. Yes, again, that comes at a cost. How much? I don't need to say, but it's not a lot, okay? And yes, all these things will add up. If you do 52 of them for a year, you've got that times by 52. But again, you only need to look at the annual report to see how much it went up. It was very, very minuscule, okay? That's the storytelling of the product. Now, how you wanted to, the parade ring, the pre-race selections, J-Bon, looking at the horses warming up, bringing in the punting experts, which was done. We had an SEN. Did we have an SEN cross in it there at one point? I mean, we had all sorts of different things that we were trying, and we did. And a lot of them worked really well.
Well, I was going to say a couple of the little things that we wanted to do so much more, but Skeeter and I would talk about, and one of them was bringing the pro punters in, because as I mentioned on Twitter, I'm a big advocate. That last 2 minutes should be about the punt.
Yeah.
And having those professional punters who people trust, they make a living out of the game, analysing the fluctuations, looking at Betfair, looking at, okay, this fluck means it's more likely that the 3 is going to lead. We didn't know whether it was the 2 or the 3, but there's evidence now the 3 is probably going to lead. I'm leaning that way. Has the price gone now? Maybe it has. Can we find a better place price about something, and how to invest? And that last couple of minutes, and I'll tell you why. One reason in particular, that has the effect of broadening the church, because if you give excellent punting information, I can guarantee you, like I said, I was a Gallops man, but I watched Channel 31. Punters who punt on anything, if they are getting quality information and they believe they can win on anything, 2 flies crawling up the proverbial wall, they will. So then, and this is one thing that wasn't explored well enough, I don't think, is you bring the thoroughbred punters and the sport punters, because they say, I don't care, maybe for a start they're not a huge fan of harness racing, but we get them involved and then they become a fan because the product is excellent. Course. So they watch the races and they enjoy it. But one thing, going back to last week's discussion about Stan standing starts and my controversial pseudo conspiracy theory, which I don't think is that conspiratorial, that maybe it was led down a path where it couldn't possibly succeed. Right? I have a feeling that TrotsVision of more recent times has almost gone down a similar path with it, and that's why this information about how much it costs and how labour intensive it is has all got out there to some degree.
Well, perhaps. I mean, the information about how much it costs is just so inflated, it's crazy. So I don't quite know what the point of that is, but what I would say about
the way it should be done has been in the wrong hands as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, but and that's just an opinion thing, isn't it? We can all talk about that. I mean, I know you don't agree with the editorial direction that I set for the channel necessarily, Jason. That's okay. You know, I think largely we agree on parts of it, but you were much bigger that we had to have less of the runner by runner and much more on the punt. And I still do think there is room to have those horses, you know, in the parade ring, feature the trainers and just showcase that. But don't get me wrong, it's never not from a punting perspective, but I do think we have to sell more than the punt.
But I'll give you an example even on that is, you know, I was not an advocate and did not believe in when we got out to 3 hosts.
Yep.
For a couple of reasons. One, it only confuses the punter at home if you're getting 3 different opinions. And often that did happen. And then you go to dad and you might have 4 different opinions. People were not, I don't think, sometimes rostered on for chemistry. Sometimes there were just too many people tipping rather than people having specific roles. We spoke to Dad Malecki about this, and he really enjoyed and enjoys being the eccentric in a way, or even looking at the way a given runner might be prepared on the track and seeing it warm up and go, oh, this is the best I've seen at this preparation. And giving a different part of, you know, a different element of the narrative. So I think there were too many cooks for a start. So the runner by runner becomes a lot easier if you don't have 3 people going or 4 people going through the runner by runner.
I agree. But so when I was on TrotsVision, I was the host. Very deliberately, I was hosting. And it wasn't my job to point out the form even, you know, I'd done some form, but that wasn't my go. So I'd introduce it. I'd throw to the expert, J-Bon, and then we'd go up to Dan Malecki, and that's how that would work. But I think at the same time, you're not doing every single runner. We were never spending almost any time on the 100 to 1 pop. It might get a quick look just for the sake of, there's the horse, but we moved on pretty swiftly, right? Yeah. And I think those things, maybe that's you could probably live with that if the horse shows up and we move on quickly, providing the chemistry's right. I think on that point, I agree with you, but it was always striving to get the right mix of hosts. And, you know, you can't just have 3 form experts, just like you can't have 3 hosts where no one says anything. You know, you've got to get the mix right. I
personally also believe that, you know, there was a move of more recent times, and I'm happy to say this, to try and make the broadcast more boring, more serious, less entertaining, and try and be something that it's not. So part of what made I don't think anyone's doing it to try and be more boring, Jason. I think that's your view of it.
Well,
but it turns out more boring if you are trying to be overly sober and overly earnest and overly serious. Channel 31 worked, and I know time's moved on, but Channel 31 worked because Hutchie would go off script and he'd say crazy things, and then Robbie Gaillard was trying to wrangle him back, and Adam was in the middle, and then Tanya and all these people, right?
The loud ties that were being worn.
But my approach was never to be unprofessional, but to be entertaining in between those races, to go out with the participants. And I think there should have been way more pre-records. Just go to a participant who turns up early on track and get that all in the can so you can use it later on. Profiling, one of the great things about 31 was profiling the participants. Yeah. You got to know Glenn Douglas was always doing something silly as he has done on Sky and TrotsVision, and you fell in love with, you're like, geez, I really like these people. And when liking the people helps you like the sport as well.
Of course.
But a little bit of cavalier enjoyment, entertainment, bants, which I feel was moved away from. And you can say, no, nobody wanted to be boring, but it was very much.
Well, that's your opinion.
I think it wasn't rewarded to be entertaining.
No, I get what you're saying, but no one sets out to do that. But you're making the point that in your vision, that was more boring. Maybe others might say they prefer that sort of coverage, J-Bon.
I would be. I'm not certain about anything, but I would be very, 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 very confident
Yep.
that not many people enjoyed that coverage. I
think
enjoyed that type of coverage that is trying to be uber professional on a platform that is not uber professional.
No. So, and again, though, if you
When I
want,
say professional, I mean uber, like slick, some sort of ESPN type. You mentioned ESPN.
I did. If you want an ESPN type production, you pay the ESPN type budget, and that's the issue. So, but
even the guys on ESPN like that have a lot, but they are entertaining.
Well, it depends. Of course, you do. You've got to have entertainment. Of course, you do. You've got to have some fun and some colour. You and I have never. I mean, Jabe, never since from 2014 onwards during our time there at HRV, and you were there previously, but certainly from when I was there in 2014, right through until when I left, right. Yeah. That was the whole point of everything we did. It was to be a bit contemporary and a bit colourful, and it did work. I mean, it did grow audiences. The statistics are there, Jason. You know, that's so I get what you're saying, and I agree with you on that. But just on the TrotsVision specific front, right? Yeah. Even pre-recorded stuff, by the way, that would cost money to do that. I like the idea, but it does cost extra money.
I'm talking about turning up on course the camera that's already there.
Yeah, no, but it still costs extra because you have to turn that round using the guys on track to do something they're not actually contracted to do. I can't give too much away, but that's not part of the deal, right? So you are paying a bit extra. I'm not saying, and it wouldn't be a huge amount. I'm not saying you wouldn't do it for the sake of the channel improving. But what I'm trying to make this point is that, you know, a lot of people might say, how come you didn't do this and how come you didn't do that? Well, for the very reason that all these things being thrown around in the industry about costs at the moment, they're all completely untrue. TrotsVision actually did run on a shoestring budget for a long, long time. And the enhancements came in during COVID, but it still wasn't wild spending. Now, in recent times, the bulk of that increased overall broadcast budget costs appears to have gone in between 2022 and 2023. Now, you know, potentially what we've got here, Jabon, is remembering that distribution was always critical. And when we built this channel, it was with Sky on side. Sky was going to put it through Sky Active. We were going to work on it together. And every time we got that onto Active, remember what else we got when we had our hosts on track? You were there many, many, many moons, Jabon. We got the additional Sky One coverage, right? So if we could find a way to enhance the coverage for Sky Active and TrotsVision, and then that gave us the bonus of the additional Sky One content on any given Saturday night, it was a pretty nice way to make a sneaky little small investment for a significant reward on the big channel on Sky One. Fast forward now to these days, okay, and when the old contract was coming up, but potentially there was some WSPs or others in the wings who may have taken TrotsVision on Jabon as a channel, which would have improved and changed the distribution of the streaming channel. Okay. Now, I'm not privy to what goes on anymore because I'm no longer at HRV, right? So, but it doesn't seem as though there's been any deal done with another WSP to get the Vision streaming through. Okay. And perhaps that's because as we've seen the cooling in the wagering market, perhaps some of those investments dried up. So maybe the channel was being built towards being something which could be basically plugged in, okay? And maybe that didn't happen. And I think what you'll probably see now, certainly from the word out of HRV in recent times, and I'm happy to see this because I've just explained why the channel was built in the first place, is that I think we will end up landing with TrotsVision far closer to where it was always supposed to be. And that is a very cost-effective way where it can have a massive impact going forward. If you get the promotion, you can still get the distribution right, okay? And you can commercialize the channel with some advertising and boost sponsorship as well. Plus, you give the clubs an opportunity to get an earn. Because remember, if you're watching race 4 tonight at Kilmore and there's a photo finish and Sky cuts to the next dog's race, and you need to know the photo finish result, well, go over to TrotsVision because that's where you can still see it. Might not be much more enhanced than that, but at least you'll get the photo finish and you'll hear the caller say it, and you'll get that result. Okay. And I used to say to clubs, if you want to have a host on track, by all means do it. That's on you, the club. It's an offer. You can do it. It's not an extra cost for HRV, Jace, to have a host turn the microphone on track and give TrotsVision a bit extra coverage. Does it look like ESPN? Maybe some shows on ESPN. Is it around the horn and these shows, which they do largely like we're doing right now?
Yeah.
You know, but is it better than nothing? Absolutely. Absolutely, it is on a Wednesday or a Thursday night. Absolutely. If the Trot Zealots would love it, tune in and here's Kirsten Graham from Bendigo, tipping winners and bands with Lockie. Of course, that's better than nothing, and I won't be told otherwise.
Well, look. Basically, I think everyone who listens and views the podcast this week will be greatly appreciative of. You can go into so much more detail, but
there's lots more.
What you've already outlined, and I think the absolutely critical point is that people are going to be very disappointed with something if they believe it's costing an arm and a leg.
Of course you would be.
So by dispelling that straight away, then you can look at it in a different frame of mind. That's where you come in. Where I come in is the discussion about things like, I felt there should have been interaction, much like there was on SEN. I think people would have got far more involved if they could text in a much more dynamic product, a more enjoyable, fun product, profiling the drivers and trainers more than ever, and handing the show over to them and getting so that they were household names for people who didn't just love harness racing, weren't just harness racing tragics, but other people who might have tuned in. And I think that's one of the critical keys as well. We had to find a balance, in my opinion, to service the hardcore audience, but then also broaden the church. And they're things like being more dynamic, having those last couple of minutes set aside for punting information. And also, to be honest, I had felt for some of the people, a lot of people were talking on Twitter about the pre-race interviews, you just get lied to and all the rest. It's just not true, but it's very, very hard. It's not an easy job. And to go out there, sometimes I know for myself, you would talk to a Nathan Jack or somebody and they might give you a run around, and then that's where the fun comes in, and actually knowing them and knowing the form to go, no, really, you said you're going to hand up. So are you telling everyone at home you're 100% going to hand up? They go, oh, look, maybe not. Or there would be little words like, oh, if the right horse comes around, we might, we'll hold the front for as long as we can. And then you just translate and say, they're going to take a sit. So I don't believe in this whole idea that you're just getting lied to, because you absolutely are not. And if you've done any lick of form yourself, you should have a pretty good idea of what you're listening to. So
race one last week.
Well,
race one last week. Tim O'Connor asked Chris Elford as he's coming up the rise, to use a thoroughbred term. I'll get whacked for that. As he's coming up the pathway there onto the track, and Toc asked Chris Elford, is there any reason you'd hand up on Queen Elida to the right horse? And Chris Elford said, wouldn't have thought so, as in no, not happening. And of course, we then saw there was a bit of a challenge for the front, Jay Bond, in the early part there. It was never going to happen. Chris was never going to hand up. He was very honest. Yeah. He said it. And I knew that he wouldn't hand up based on what I'd heard on the coverage. That's one race. That's one race that I just happened to be tuning in with. That's also often. Also why you've got to be good enough every single time that TrotsVision is on air. That if I always think about this, that somebody, for whatever reason, their mate has said, I won some money on TrotsVision, watching TrotsVision 2 weeks ago, and they say, oh, bugger, I've got nothing to do, I'll watch it tonight. It has to be a quality product every single time, because if they have one bad experience, they're not going to come back, particularly if they're only sort of peripherally or superficially engaged with harness racing. Can I quickly just for those who'll be hearing that and thinking, we've deviated. No. So just let's explain, when you say quality, what we're talking about. We are not talking about ESPN free-to-air quality. What we're talking about is quality content. Yes. Quality information, bands, entertainment, information, right? Dynamic, fun to watch. Fun to watch in between, even when you're not maybe killing it on the punt. I'll give away this secret. There was another thing you and I explored, okay, which was you've got the more traditional, potentially TrotsVision stream, right, and potentially an arrangement with a radio station at the time, whichever one wanted to pick us up, and potentially having a bit more of a knockabout fun kind of commentary, a bit like the old Press Red for Ed or whatever it was on the Fox back in the day. And that would be potentially, I don't know, it could be yourself, it could be back in the day, it'd be Blake Redden and you guys doing it with your style, right? And getting some involvement from having your own punters club or whatever it is, right? And overlaying that, right? So therefore, you've all of a sudden got a choice of the more traditional coverage here, okay, on TrotsVision 1 or whatever you want to call it, and the more fun sort of colour coverage over here. And that way you are kind of servicing both. And you and I both agreed
Yeah.
that would have been a terrific thing if we could make it work. Yeah,
100%. But I'm going to put you on the spot here, because you've been quite diplomatic on a couple of things. Just give me a yes or no if possible here.
Right.
We won't use the word boring, but has the more sleek attempt at trying to be something else, has that, in your opinion, over the last 18 months, 2 years, has that led to an increase? We don't know. We're not privy. Has that made it TrotsVision? But in your opinion, has it made it more watchable or more popular? And you know the answer.
I don't know because I haven't watched it as much as I used to, J-Bomb.
Anecdotal feedback would be enough, wouldn't it?
Well, you're asking the question and answering it, so I don't need to. So because you kind of are clearly. But
because I'm trying to coach you into the corner.
No, but I understand what you're saying, Jace. I do. But there is room for differences of opinion about how things could be presented. There absolutely is.
No doubt about it.
The one thing that everyone should agree on is that it must be entertaining. Okay, so if you're not ticking the entertainment box,
I don't think everybody does agree with that. That's the thing.
Well, but I hear what you're saying, but I don't think anyone sets out deliberately to make it not entertaining.
It needs to be. It needs to be something, like I say, on SEN track when we did the Lids flight. When it's still going now, but when I did, the idea is, even if you're not winning for a few races, that you're still engaged enough.
Of course.
And in my opinion, we've already said it, but like the race callers, because at the end of the day, the way it worked out, you obviously are trying new people and trying to get different people involved. But Dan Malecki is a known legend in racing overall. So Dan Malecki's voice is going to mean more than somebody else's. Lockie McIntosh's voice is going to mean more than many other people, because the average racing punter knows Lockie McIntosh, and they definitely know Dan Malecki. So having them there, a little bit less, I guess, going through the motions and just filling in the time. Obviously, I believe, and I think you do too, but I'm not going to press you on it, that the commercialisation that you're talking about is being possible now. Certain elements of that have always been possible. There's no doubt. There was a point where the ascendancy was enough where you could have commercialised it.
100% there was, and I won't go into detail, but look, right from the get-go, the whole idea, even of the increased investment, J-Bond, was to be offset by money coming back in commercially. And just my opinion, I think the channel was a bit late to the party in that space, and I think it could have been turned on much earlier. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that's a pretty good rundown, and I think there's new information there for everybody. And
I hope so, because and you know what, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to flick me a DM or something, because we lived it, Jace. We did live it, and I fully respect. I fully respect that. We're not living it now. That's fine. What I won't cop is rewriting of history, which is nonsense, and that's what we're seeing with these ridiculous numbers being thrown around. It's just not true.
No, it's definitely not true. And the one point I do agree with you on, but
with a caveat.
Well, no, but here's one point I definitely agree with that you might not believe that I would agree with. It's still, because of the budget and because it pays for itself in many ways, there is still a possibility for it to be a very, very important, and particularly if you can find partners and find alliances, then all of a sudden it really gets exciting, right? And there's no reason why that couldn't have happened already, but it still could be exciting, but you've got to have the right attitude about, everyone's got to be on the same page about the vibe and the feel of what you're trying to do.
Yep. And you won't agree. You may not agree with me on this point, Jace, but I do think, based on what we're hearing recently and where it's going, that it's getting back to where it needs to be. Okay, now how far it goes along that path, will determine whether you come on board and say, "Hey, that's exactly what it's all about," or it won't. Okay, and I fully respect that and I appreciate it. And that's, but I do think now it is, from what HRV said about how the coverage is going to be done between September and I think early next year. Okay, it's sort of TrotsVision season. It is now back to what it was designed for. The editorial product and how you present that itself, okay, that's up for discussion and it's going to have different opinions. And I totally respect your view. And you know, there are lots that you and I, J-Bon, have agreed with in this space. But I am encouraged by what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing out of the TrotsVision space at the moment. I think it's back heading in the right direction, and it is a massive opportunity still for the industry going forward. I guess the key here will be what's done with it from this point, from a commercialization point of view, from a distribution point of view, long term, and from a promotion point of view, and of course from an entertainment point of view, Chase, because lifting turnover is obviously crucial.
Well, this is absolutely my final word, but that is a KPI you can measure, whether it lifts turnover, right? Number one. But I think everything is made so convoluted and so complex. If you had 3 or 4 key initiatives, and one that I'm going to mention right now, is that apart from the turnover aspect, nearly the main objective of TrotsVision, in my opinion, should always have been to highlight our heroes, horses and humans, 100%. So that they became better, so that people knew Greg Sugars and Nathan Jack and Jackie Barker and Chris Alford and Jimmy, the god among all men, Herbertson, as well as they know James McDonald and Mark Zara and Jamie Carr, right? Yeah. And part of the entertainment thing that I'm talking about is what I always sought to do while getting good information and having a great chat and being professional and doing the form was to get them to show their personalities, to get them to have a smile and a laugh and engage to the point. And they were amazing at doing it and they loved it. And then people look at Jimmy Herbertson laughing at himself, or me saying that Jack Law and old mate Liam Older are long-lost brothers from Tasmania somewhere. Seeing that smile and seeing the personality, all of a sudden you feel connected to them. Yeah. And that if you nearly made that turnover and then exposing and highlighting the participants and the equine heroes, that would nearly be, you could nearly just build on that.
And that was the platform. Yes. There's a reason that we asked the drivers to take their helmets off after every race and talk to them, because we wanted to show their face. Yeah. There's a reason why I commissioned at a very cut price, mates rate deal, to have the intro built, which was basically a rip-off of the Formula One intro theme that you see on the Foxtel there, J-Bon.
Best broadcast sport there is.
It was fantastic, that intro. We had drivers make their way into the city, into the studios at Creative Tech, who did a magnificent job, right, at a very, very good rate. And we got that built, and the excitement and
it felt like Event TV.
The energy that those drivers had just from coming in and being involved, let alone the finished product with the song and the pumping up leading into every TrotsVision coverage, J-Bon. That was awesome to see. And look at those images of those drivers. Look at what we're presenting, the professional look, right? The professional look, but fun, powerful, expert horsemen and women, young guns. Mate, that's what it was all about. And I tell you, one thing I'm disappointed about is when I saw TrotsVision come in last week, I didn't see that. So I'm not sure about that. But again, I like where it's heading more broadly. But it's a good discussion. I just hope the one thing that people can take whatever we want. They can say we're talking nonsense or whatever. We'll go to the annual report. The figures are all outlined there, right? And just trust me, I was there at the coalface, and I know exactly when I hear rubbish, and that's what I'm hearing, Jay.
We've gone wild and crazy, so let's rip through codes. Some 3-2-1s and black bookers from last week, I reckon. You're 3-2-1?
I don't have a black booker, J-Bon, but I've got 3-2-1. Yeah. But you go first. No, here we go. One vote, Stephen Reed.
Yep.
2 votes, Emma Stewart.
Yep.
3 votes, Jackie Barker.
Yeah,
I'm probably talking through the pocket a little bit there, but she got everything out of Mickey to success to get that horse home, J-Bon.
3 votes to Jackie Barker as well for me. And not only for Mickey to success, but I even felt Stitched Up Dan could have just sat back and was just perfectly she's just a very good tactical decision maker, as well as, I say that
very underrated and all the rest of it,
but I don't know. I don't know if she's that underrated anymore, but she probably is. So
I still think she is. She's still not getting the opportunities, but I'm glad to see she's getting more and more now.
I've said to you privately, Jackie's not the kind of girl that's going to bust into trainers who are having a conversation and go, "Oh yeah, I I want to drive one for you. So she's not a mover and shaker in that regard, but I think her performances speak for themselves too for Emma Stewart.
Yep.
And one for Chris Lang.
One for Chris Lang.
And Kian Stuka.
That must be one of the first times we've actually had different 3-2-1s, J-Bon, for a while. We've been pretty consistent there. We've only split the one. I had Steve Reed.
We started off on divergent paths, and then we met in the middle, and now
we did. Who's your black booker?
Stuka. Kian Stuka.
Kian Stuka.
Stuka.
Looking forward to finding out what you think of Kian Stuka this week. But that's in a separate podcast, J-Bon, because this has been the Tongue Tie Off podcast on the Pace Setters Network. Make sure if you enjoy this content, which is a bit different, we hope, to what's being put out on other channels in other spaces, right? Make sure you get to pacesetters.au. Do us a favor. It's free. It takes 20 seconds, 30 seconds of your time. Call it up on Apple Pods, right? When you call it up to listen, and give us a rating of 5 stars, because it's easy as just clicking on it, okay? But what it does is it actually propels this podcast and the sport further up that podcast tree, and we need that. We need to get the rankings up a bit, right? Yeah. Same on YouTube. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. For you, if you subscribe and follow, it just means that every time we drop a podcast, it will pop up on your mobile, and you'll know that there's the latest podcast there. So,
and you can leave the comments there as well as on Facebook or Twitter. Of
course you can. Yeah, you can. You can put comments anywhere there, and but we'd love it. The more interactions, the better. We're not always going to agree, and that's okay. But, we love the banter, and we love the conversation. In fact, Jace, we must quickly, before we close it off, there was some listener feedback I wanted to raise. I didn't want to forget it. Okay. Joshua Prentice, a very good friend of the show. I forwarded you this one. Josh said, hi, Cody, my name's Josh. I'm a proud tongue tie.
We know you, Josh.
Listener.
We know you.
Exactly. I wanted to send you a longer message following last week's discussion about discretionary handicaps. In lieu of those, why don't we explore the option of discretionary barrier draws? Saturday night's Victoria Cup is sadly looking like a one-act affair after the barrier draw. This is no criticism to Leap to Fame, but imagine if HRV had the power to select barrier draws for runners to give the best spectacle. Josh does, use the point that the gallops use weights. If we're going to not pursue standing starts, we need to find another way. So what do you give your take firstly, J-Bon, on Joshua's feedback there?
I think I may have met Josh once, but I always love his feedback and have for years. And he's a great supporter of the show. And I love his thoughts. And he's a thinker about the game, and he just consumes it all. He lives in Scandinavia, doesn't he? He's Sweden.
Yeah, he does. Sweden.
No, there's not many things I can say definitely wouldn't work. Unfortunately, that definitely wouldn't work because, the riots on the Capitol in America, during Trump saying that he'd won the election. You'd have that on 400 Epsom Road. You couldn't do it because, and particularly, number one, you've got to isolate a certain number of the big Group 1 races that are if you're going to use the thoroughbred analogy, wait for age. You can't create a situation, particularly because there's so few big Grand Circuit type races these days. You can't say a Leap to Fame every time he goes in one of those big races. You're going to make it as hard as ridiculously hard for him. Those races have got to be quarantined, but week to week, you can make discretionary decisions on handicaps, but sort of suggesting, this should be here and that should be there, and then you're working with gate speed, aren't you? And then you're drawing one maybe for a horse without gate speed with a bit of ability. It becomes not only codes an overwhelmingly convoluted task, but I just think there'd be absolute riots.
No,
that's a problem.
And I agree. I don't think it could happen. I also, my main point here is, yes, we do have to find a way to handicap races better. That's where the standing starts coming back, as we discussed last week, and we'll be continuing to talk about that in coming weeks. I'm working on an article at the moment, Jace, which I'll eventually put out on pacesetters.au, which tells a really stark tale about just where some of our races have gone since the stand starts have gone. But I'll just say this: you can't penalise a good horse for the sake of being a good horse in the best races. You do need those genuine, championship.
You can in a Hunter Cup, can't you? Which is like a Melbourne Cup. You can in a Hunter Cup.
Different. That's
different. You can't do it in a Miracle Mile and a
Queensland,
Blacks and Fake.
But that's different because that is the Hunter Cup, isn't it?
Correct.
That's the history of the Hunter Cup, just like the Melbourne Cup. But you cannot do it for those wait for age classics again, to use a let's call it a fast class classics, Jace, because that's not fair. If you get a champion horse, you might elect not to go in the Hunter Cup because you'll get penalised. You can target the Vic Cup. Well, that's your prerogative.
Yeah.
and the Hunter Cup will get its own bunch of horses, and we move on. But Josh, love your feedback, love your passion, keep it coming. And that this time wraps up the Tongue Tie Off podcast. So thanks for listening.